WINS presents Living Fully with Disabilities, Visible and Invisible.
Good evening and hello to everyone joining us tonight, whether you're here live at Toronto City Hall, or joining us virtually through Zoom. We welcome you. A few housekeeping notes before we start. The washrooms are located through the doors here at the back, directly, and turn right. The emergency exits, there's 3 different doors. Aid in the case of an emergency, please wait at the doors here at the front and security will be here to assist. And if you need to take a break or stretch, feel comfortable to do so. We will be recording this on Zoom. For those of you on Zoom, you can submit your questions through the chat feature and those will be shared out with me. My name is Lisa Kelly and I work at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And for the last 10 years, I've been working in the disability and employment space, helping to connect employers to job seekers with a disability. It's pretty close to my heart because I self-identify as a person with a disability and I have for over 50 years. So it's an honor for me to be invited tonight to be the MC and moderator of the distinguished panel that we have here tonight. I'd like to take a moment before we start to acknowledge that the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It's now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. For those of you who may not be aware of it, June is Indigenous History Month. And personally, I'm committed on my journey of learning and unlearning to honor the history and contributions that Indigenous people have made and continue to make, building Canada's economic and social fabric. And I encourage everyone here and everybody on Zoom to take some time to explore resources that are available that foster a deeper understanding of Canada's history and Indigenous perspectives across the country. On behalf of our host, Winning Inclusive Solutions, also known as WINS, and I'll be referring to it as WINS for the rest of the evening, I'm pleased to welcome you to this evening's enlightening and what I believe will be a thought-provoking discussion centered around living fully with both visible and invisible disabilities. A little bit about WINS for those of you who are not familiar with it. It was launched in December of 2018, and it's a not-for-profit that promotes the inclusive policies in Canada's workforce. It's led by founder and executive director, Dr. Hitu Sood. Hitu, would you like to stand up and say hello? There we go. WINS is committed to ensuring the creation of more equitable workplaces in which diverse members of Canadian society can flourish. They accomplish this by helping organizations develop comprehensive policies and programs that lead to transformative change. Dr. Sood uses her extensive experience in global human resources and diversity, equity, and inclusion to help WINS realize its goals, to create a community of support for diverse, multifaceted, and talented professionals, and to achieve greater success and break down societally created barriers. Dr. Sood has been named in the North American 100 Most Inclusive HR Influencers in the World multiple times. So thank you for starting WIN and co-founding, and we're delighted that you're hosting this evening tonight. This event tonight is part of the Road to Success initiative, which features organized public learning events that highlight diverse professionals, skills, and strength in a variety of ways. WIN provides a public platform for diverse individuals as speakers and a community of support in which diverse professionals can learn and network with like-minded others. As part of this initiative, WINS offers consulting to employers, government service providers, and other not-for-profits which aim to empower diverse professionals. Each year, under the WINS Showcasing Diverse Voices, they conduct research. For 2023, there's a focus on economic disparity for racialized and marginalized groups in Canada that can help organizations gain valuable insights and take action towards creating a more equitable and just society. WINS will measure the economic experiences and perceptions of individuals from marginalized communities including questions that concern us all, but are related to the rising cost of living, the risk of recession, and the current precarious working conditions. A comprehensive report providing a deeper understanding of the challenges facing marginalized communities and strategies for addressing the economic disparities will be made available. They're looking for sponsors and partner organizations that would be interested in supporting this research. So please reach out to Dr. Sood or any of the board members that you see here tonight if you are interested in participating. And for more information on WIN's programs, I encourage you to visit their website to learn more. I'd also like to acknowledge at this time the support of the WIN's board of directors, advisors, and teams of volunteers, which you will see on the screen. And I'm going to invite everyone who is one of those members of those groups to stand up so people can identify you. Or raise your hand if you're unable to stand up. Perfect. Thank you. Okay, we're looking forward to our keynote speaker tonight, Rayhan Azmat, a senior executive at Cineplex Entertainment with lived experience of a disability, but who's also renowned as a powerful storyteller, but I'm more on that later. We're gonna start tonight up with a fantastic and diverse panel of Canadian business leaders who will share their personal stories, insights, and expertise on accessibility and disability advocacy. So I'm going to introduce everyone here. We're going to start at the far end of the panel with Juan Olarte. Juan is an accessibility veteran with more than 20 years experience. Juan immigrated to Canada from Colombia in 1999. He identifies as legally blind and is deeply conscious of the challenges faced by individuals who live with a disability. Juan has a long storied career honing his expertise working as an accessibility specialist for, and there are a lot of organizations here, Bank of Montreal, Scotiabank, CIBC, Ryerson University, now known as TMU, Sheridan College, George Brown College, NTT Data Inc., the Ontario Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, Ministry of Consumer Services, CNIB, and Deloitte Canada. A digital accessibility disruptor in his own right, Juan began creating and designing the framework for what he envisioned as a full service and efficient accessibility solutions platform over 7 years ago. Today, he's the CEO, and digitally accessible technology team are continuously developing, iterating, and prototyping the company's digital tool. Juan also currently teaches accessibility website design at Sheridan College. Welcome, Juan.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Okay, next I'd like to introduce Assad Mallick. Assad has had progressive human resources and total rewards experience over the past 15 years in a variety of industries, including high tech, telecommunications, pharmaceutical retail, financial services, entertainment, and total well-being. He has worked across Canada and has managed teams for well-known brands across the globe. Assad has also extensive volunteer experience and board roles with the David Suzuki Foundation, HR counsel for the not-for-profit sector, Oak Valley Health, and WINS. Currently, Assad is the VP and head of Global Total Rewards and HR operations at Telus Health. Assad holds a Bachelor of Commerce in Marketing and Human Resources and is a certified compensation professional, a global remuneration professional, and a certified human resources leader. Welcome, Assad.
Thank you.
And finally, we are joined by my friend, Dean Delpeache. Dean is a diversity, inclusion, equity, and recruitment specialist who partners with executives and teams to create frameworks of equity within organizations that allow qualified talent to bring innovation to the workplace. For the last 10 years, he's been engaged in bringing star talent to scaling organizations to create strong performing teams within the tech sector. He completed the Executive Master of Human Resources Management program at York University and a certificate in Leadership and Inclusion at Centennial College. Welcome, Dean. Okay, so let's get to the good part, which is where we hear from them, not me. So let's begin our panel discussion. Given that we have about 30 minutes for this portion of the evening, I'm going to ask panelists to keep their remarks to 2 to 3 minutes in length. We have so much expertise in this room that we want to ensure we get everyone's thoughts. We will hopefully have an opportunity for follow-up questions if there's something that you're particularly interested in. So I'm going to start by asking each of you to address this first question. I think we'll start, Dean, you're comfortable with that? Okay.
No problem.
The unemployment rate for people with disabilities remains stubbornly high, much higher than those without a disability, and even more so for individuals with intersecting identities. So what do you think are the largest barriers, and what can be done to address those challenges?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that I reflect on when I think about a question like this, particularly when we're looking at inclusion for whether it's people with disabilities or just even inclusion in general. And I think, one of the biggest challenges is that companies, number one, don't have not considered the infrastructure internally to support different dimensions of diversity, and particularly when it comes to persons with disabilities. So even today, you still have individuals in companies, when someone asks for an accommodation, they say, well, that might be too much money, or I don't know if we can do that. Not recognizing that, every organization, particularly in Ontario, has the responsibility to accommodate up until what we call undue hardship. And so I think, number one, companies need to strategically ensure they have the infrastructure to support all individuals, irrespective of their dimension of diversity. I think the second thing I'll say on this is the importance of continued, what I call learning, education, training within organizations. Whether that's through, whether having a live speaker come in and train someone like Juan, sharing experiences and expertise, whether that's specific modules geared to ensure that individuals are informed on a regular cadence. Because I find what I've found in the realm of consulting is that individuals a lot of times are just ignorant. They just don't know what they don't know, and we need to be able to express that and make sure people understand. And the third thing I'll say, and then I'll pass it on to my colleagues, is something I think is extremely important. Probably one of the biggest foundations of inclusion is what I call inclusive leadership. People who are able to model the behavior, what it means to actually be inclusive, and ensuring that leaders throughout your organization are supportive of people irrespective of their dimension of diversity. And I think these can definitely be barriers. I think at the end of the day, we don't necessarily just want to see someone with who might be in a wheelchair on your visual public website to make it seem like. We actually need real action, and I think that's kind of where it starts. So I'll hand it over.
Perfect. First off, I wanted to thank everyone in attendance here, the individuals online. Lisa, thank you so much for moderating. Our gracious sponsors, City Hall, for having us here. Getting back to the question around our greatest or the biggest barrier, I think it's people. I think it's humans. This notion of the unconscious bias, stereotypes that individuals have, a stigma associated with individuals that have disabilities. That are they going to be as productive? Are they going to be able to contribute? And later tonight, you're going to hear from an individual, a very dynamic individual, that's going to dispel that myth, going to turn it upside down on its head. An individual who's had very senior experience at one of the most iconic brands in Canada, that has been resilient and has helped navigate through the pandemic. So you'll hear a little bit more about that individual. But what we can do, I think, in our roles, first off, is how we look at onboarding individuals, how we look at recruitment activities, how we make it accessible, how do we embrace individuals from all walks of life. So that's what we can do at the front end. But then once we integrate individuals, what does that look like in terms of adapting, having accessible projects and initiatives where they can show up as their best self? And then lastly, how do we develop programs that will help support them? And not just the programs, but how do we deliver those programs to individuals? And I'll touch on some of those things a little bit later tonight. The other thing, if I were to add one more point, would be this notion of invisible disability. And I think that's something that we've just scratched the surface on. I think one of the organizations that I worked at during the pandemic, this notion of having groups of individuals that have similarities, whether it's they share a similar disability. It's almost we referred to them as empathy circles, where individuals can congregate, share their stories, feel more comfortable, and raise some of that awareness. So these are some of the things that I think we can do.
Great, thank you. Juan.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I have to agree with both Dean and Assad in terms of what are some of the obstacles are going to be when somebody's going to try to apply for a job, how accessible is that experience going to be? And I just want to stop here and make everybody reflect that many times companies try to do the right thing. Unfortunately, their vendors or people or companies that they're doing the procurement for specific applications to apply for jobs may not be accessible. So it could be like a checklist for them. And those are the kind of barriers that if they don't know, they are going to create more obstacles for people with disabilities. Once you get into a job, yes, workplace accommodation is going to be one of them. But also I want to make sure that people understand that self-disclosure in terms of accessibility or the kind of disabilities they have is a big one, because many times they may not disclose, while a company is going to fully embrace their disability and provide them with accommodations, but they could go 2, 3, even 6 months with a lot of problems not being able to perform well in their jobs because they didn't disclose. And at the end of the day, they're going to perhaps be let go. And that then they're going to be disclosing, oh yeah, I had a disability, but at that point it's too late. So people really have to self-advocate and let people know, this is how I work, this is how I'm going to be able to complete my task, which may be different from how other people do it, but at the same time, I'm going to be able to perform.
Thank you. So, I think we covered a lot there, and I think we'll delve a little bit deeper into some of these topics, whether it's the unconscious bias stigma piece, the inclusive leadership, which it's great. Assad, you mentioned we're going to hear from somebody who's dynamic and is a leader, and also, showing that the abilities that people have definitely are some of our processes. So it's great that you've touched on those. One, I'm going to go back to you and I'm going to ask you, this event addresses both visible and invisible disabilities, and you touched on that in terms of disclosure, and that's definitely a change. But what are some of the unique challenges, barriers, or differences from your perspective for each of these groups?
I can tell you from experience. So I have a disability. I'm visually impaired. Whenever I go into a job, I know I'm going to require as magnification devices or large print. Many times people are not aware of my disability, which can be difficult. They may say, oh, you don't need any kind of accommodation. You don't have a cane or you don't have a guide dog. Actually, I do. So it's actually fighting with that type of stigma in terms of being able to educate people in terms of different type of disabilities. And it could be that I doesn't look like I have a disability, but I actually need equal access to opportunities or maybe assistive technologies that are going to help me with that. In terms of the invisible disabilities, I used to work at Scotiabank doing workplace accommodation, and the biggest thing was people would require very simple assistive technology to maybe help them read, but they wouldn't advocate for themselves. And again, it will go into a long cycle where they were not able to perform well at their job. And everybody, whether it was going to be co-workers or managers, will be complaining about them, but without realizing, hey, this person has a disability, what can I do to help them? So I think that's going to be really important. Advocate and educate.
So I'm going to just jump before we go to Dean. I just want to do a follow-up with you, Juan.
Mhm.
So how do you personally challenge those stigmas and biases when you come across them yourself? Because I know that's a question I get from a lot of people with disabilities, is like, how do I do that effectively?
Honestly, it's going to be a lot of it is going to be education. So many times I used to be a designer and developer, and I remember going into interviews, people asking me, how can you actually design a website if you cannot see? I'm like, actually, I can see, I just see in a different way. So I will have to demonstrate what assistive technology was, how I can use it, and how I will be able to arrive to the same outcome that a person without disability will do it, but in a different way. So in reality, it's thinking out of the box and how can I deliver specific project with the results, but I just do it differently. And once they understood, so, okay, but a lot of times it's education and really taking the time to say, you know what, this is not personal. It's not attack on me or on my disability. They just don't know. So what can I do to teach them?
I love that word, the education, and for both Dean and Assad, I'm going to throw that at you if you have suggestions as well, because I think it's something that when you have a disability, you're faced with that all the time. Dean, visible, invisible, unique challenges, barriers, or differences.
Yeah. Again, thanks, Lisa. And Juan, I really appreciate that answer. This is personal for me because I actually have a diagnosed medical condition. And years ago, I was in an unfortunate situation that caused me to be hospitalized for several days and basically, a whole bunch of different things. And so now I have a diagnosed medical condition that I actually need accommodations for. And my accommodations, I mean, to Juan's point, I mean, you look at somebody, you don't know what's going on, but my accommodations actually required me to need more time, and more time to work on things, more time to deal with different things, and sometimes I need certain types of assistive technology to really support me and to help me. And I think the thing is if I'm being real, there's a stigma that if you can't see it, it's not real. And I think that is one of the reasons why I mentioned the importance of education, because a lot of times if someone doesn't see it, they think that they can demand whatever they want. And what ends up happening is for someone who might have that invisible disability, they just feel uncomfortable, right? They don't feel at ease. They don't feel like they can share. They don't feel to open. And that comes back down to the simple word of, do I really belong here? Do I belong in this space? Do I intrinsically feel that way? And that's why I kind of go back to the thoughts of, when it comes down to it, like, leaders need to model that behavior of, listen, this is a space where it doesn't matter who you are, bring your authentic self, and we want you to share who you are. And if there's something that you need, we are here to support you. And so I think that really coming down to kind of breaking those challenges, and these are some of the things that people with invisible, disabilities might face, that we have to kind of, move forward beyond.
So I'm going to do a follow-up with you as well. Of course, that's a great, and thank you for sharing that. That was powerful. How did you learn what you needed? Because I think sometimes when we grow up and we have an invisible disability, for instance, we may not know what we need. And it's a process of learning and then, communicating what you need. So any advice for people on that piece?
Well, for me, how I learned what I needed was almost by default kind of chance. And it was really, I was missing deadlines.
Okay.
If I'm being honest with you, wasn't that I wasn't a hard worker, wasn't that I wasn't a strong performer, but there were certain deadlines that were happening and I started to miss them, and I was wondering what's going on. Like, why am I, what's happening? And then after I realized, hold on a minute, maybe it's because you actually just need more time. And so it was through that I've been able to communicate to clients or whoever I need, where they might need 2 weeks to do something, I might say, hey, I just need an extra week to solve this, etc. And that's kind of how, for me, I've been able to evolve around that.
That's great. And for those of you who want a really good resource, JAN, J-A-N, Searchable Online Accommodation Resource, SOAR, is a great tool for figuring out what you need. You can search by disability type, functional limitation, or work environment. Okay, Assad, anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think both Dean and Juan touched on a lot of it. A lot of it is education. I mean, I heard from Dean also the power of storytelling and telling your stories. I'd say the other thing is when you have an organization and you actually put it in the DNA and the culture of the organization, it translates throughout in everything you do, whether it's training, how you interact with customers, how you even do procurement contracts. One of the things that I've been noticing is within procurement contracts, when you're asking for services or goods, they have that now embedded. What is your diversity and inclusivity strategy? They want to be affiliated with organizations that have that top of mind, that's ingrained in their DNA. So I think a combination of several factors that both Juan and Dean mentioned, as well as just the power of storytelling ingrained in your DNA, muscle memory in everything you do.
So again, follow up, because we don't want to make this too easy for you guys. How do you ingrain something in a company's DNA?
So I think a lot of it has to do with the individuals that you bring on. Disney has this interesting policy of how, you know, they've got an interesting customer service culture. It's a consistent level. They look at consistency. So when they go through the recruitment process, they ensure that everyone has that DNA, or it just wouldn't work. So when you think of customer service as one lens, you add in the lens of diversity and inclusivity, and having that lens, if you embody that in your recruitment processes, and that's who you start looking for, individuals that embody that, the DNA, the values, the culture around diversity and inclusivity. I think it starts from the top when you bring people in.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're going to stay with you, Assad. We're going to ask the next question. Small business owners and entrepreneurs can feel that limited resources may be an obstacle to their diversity and inclusion efforts. What advice would you give to businesses and leaders looking to make an impact?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think there's lots of resources that you have, especially nowadays over the last 5 years. It's exponentially grown, both diversity and inclusivity and wellness and well-being. So there's lots of resources at different levels of the government, but also not-for-profit organizations, organizations that tailor to a specific type of disability, whether you have autism, CNIB, for individuals that have a vision impairment, but then also broad-based organizations that specifically look at disability kind of through the lens of kind of at a macro level to help individuals get hired, help individuals, or organizations retain individuals. So that's one way, just the resources that you have available. I'd say also this notion of the power of crowd surfing, social media. A lot of organizations have, especially big organizations, have now, ingrained diversity and inclusivity in their organization culture, in their people and culture or HR department. And so they've got, groups of individuals. And the one thing that unites, and I've seen this at different organizations, is the power of purpose. Individuals in those roles are purpose driven. And so leverage some of them. They're willing to help. Part of, you see many of us here, you can hear from Rayhan later on, we didn't know each other from before. We came together because of that power of purpose from different organizations. We've worked with different organizations. So I think leverage some of those resources. Individuals are typically happy and excited to help advance the movement. Again, purpose-driven individuals. I'd also say have an open mind, when you're a small business owner. Don't find reasons of, why you wouldn't want to hire someone who has a disability, but what would it take to hire someone? Like, how can you change the way of work? How can you change the culture of the business that you have? And I mean, it makes good business sense because it resonates a lot with clients and customers nowadays.
Yeah, I agree completely. As a network of small businesses representing small businesses across the province, I actually find them quite open to being flexible and embracing inclusive strategies. Juan.
Yes. So I have a small business. So our organization is not bigger than 10 people. And we are faced with that problem in terms of how can we actually bring people with disabilities or bring more diversity. So I have also worked for large organizations, and I know they have the luxury to say we have workplace accommodations, we have HR, which for us is really difficult not to do it. But to Assad's point, you can always partner up with non-for-profits, CNIB and other associations or non-for-profits that deal with different people with disabilities. But I also want to mention CCRW has been amazing for us because they have helped us in terms of being able to find talent for people with disabilities. They help us with the recruitment. Even they help us with the workplace accommodations. So many companies, small companies, don't realize that a lot of these non-for-profits, they are given a mandate by the government to help people with disabilities find jobs. And that also includes workplace accommodation. So if you have a small company and you think, oh, I'm not going to be able to hire people with disabilities because A, it's going to be expensive to get accommodation, guess what? You can actually do it. And the next thing is, how do you work with people with different disabilities? So having a startup, you're going to require people who may do different type of roles. So at the end of the day, once you have that interview with that person, understand what are some of the things that they're going to be able to do, some of the things that they're going to be able to do different, and maybe some of the things that they're not going to be able to do. But once you get to learn how they work, I can tell you there's no other resource that has giving us such wonderful experiences and such quality work as people with disabilities.
That's a great answer. And actually, for those of you that aren't familiar, CCRW is the Canadian Council for Rehabilitation and Work. They're an employment service provider. There's lots of great organizations out there also providing access to talent and supports, community living, YMCA, Ready, Willing, Able, Specialist Sterna. There's an endless list. Apologies to all the 78 employment service providers I work with and that I didn't mention. Dean, do you have anything else you want to mention?
No, I would only just compliment by just literally saying, like, I think that, you know, again, it comes back down for small businesses, because I have a small business, for us to be educated, right? And, you know, coming to even an event like this and learning, oh my gosh, there's so many different things that we can, you know, go out to get resources in. And I think that's what small businesses need. They just need the education on what do I do, where do I go. But I would encourage anyone, and I strongly encourage, especially if you have a small business in the room, you know, go out intentionally and look for people with the right skill set, irrespective of who they are in their dimension of diversity. But if they have if they are a person with a disability, I encourage you to hire them. You might get, you know, some amazing results that you would never have seen. I've worked with some amazing people who are persons with disabilities, and they have done fantastic things. And so, you know, I encourage you. There's a amazing pool out there.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Now, Dean, we know that real progress on diversity and inclusion requires proactive and ongoing effort. Right? We've talked about inclusive leadership. I totally agree with you. What are some other strategies that you could share with the audience today that might contribute to that progress? So you've talked about training, you've talked about, you know, embracing the inclusive leadership. Anything else?
Yeah, I think I want to start with this first. We're living in a day where, actually, I'll preface this. I'm in a meeting, a board meeting. I sit on a couple boards. I'm in a board meeting, and we're talking about is Black inclusion a fad? And I'm going to tell you why we said this. Is Black inclusion a fad? Because George Floyd's murdered, everybody starts to jump on this bandwagon, and then all of a sudden now you're not hearing much about things. And then we morph the conversation into, is diversity and inclusion now becoming this fad? And because, you know, a lot of companies nowadays, they're slashing budgets. We're hearing a lot of negativity happening towards, like, particularly in the US, towards, you know, this type of work. And I think the key core thing is people need to recognize that creating inclusive spaces is a journey. It's not a thing that we try to set up once and hope it works for the best. And I think that's what people have done. It's almost like setting up people to fail. So I want to encourage us, you know, I don't know who we are all in the room and what we do, but I want to encourage us, first of all, to understand that, number one, it's a journey and it requires work. If you want to, and it's weird because we're talking about respect,
Yeah,
but it's work to actually to have people change their behavior and recognize that we need to respect one another in our workplaces, irrespective of who we are. Think about this month. We're in Pride Month. And if you've noticed, there's been a lot of rhetoric around LGBT inclusion and the fact that there's so much hatred and negativity and discrimination towards people from the LGBTQ community. And so I think what we need to recognize is what we're really learning is this is real work that we've got to do. And it starts with, and Assad mentioned it, integrating change in every aspect of your business. We're not just talking about hiring people. We're talking about how you develop careers. We're talking about succession planning. We're talking about who your suppliers are. We're talking about the real nitty-gritty work of getting things done. And then, as I continue to harp on, it's really about people understanding the importance of really being educated and actually modeling this behavior. At the end of the day, that's what we're all here to do. And so, probably have a lot more to say, but the reality is that it kind of really sticks into these things. This is not about a fad. This is not about a show. This is not about putting up LinkedIn posts that say, we stand against racism. No, this is about doing real work internally in our companies to make sure that when I sit amongst the table of people, that I feel like my words are heard, my ideas are heard, my thoughts are heard. I'm a part of the building of the organizations that I'm a part of. And I think that's really key.
I love that you talked about this being a journey. And when I'm often talking with businesses, I talk about it being an iterative process. You're continuously improving, changing, modifying. And Juan, I'm going to ask you to speak to this because we were speaking earlier about this whole idea of an inclusive design approach. Do you mind sharing a couple thoughts on that and how that might apply to the disability community?
Well, yeah. So a lot of the times when we, especially for myself, when we talk about an inclusive design approach, it comes really to web accessibility or digital accessibility. And how can we actually create an inclusive design experience that is equally impactful, not only for somebody with a disability, but for everybody? So we try to go around or look at it from the perspective of different users, whether you have a disability or not, and how can you actually make an impact for them. Now, for me, one of the things and one of the things we wanted to do when we founded our company was to create equal access to information for people with disabilities. But what we discovered in our journey is that equal access means equal access for everybody. And many times there are people who may not have a disability, but yet they may not be able to access technology just because they may not be as knowledgeable. So how can we actually make an impact for them? And many times accessibility, while invisible, it actually helps those people. So thinking of it from the inclusive design experience, it actually helps us.
And I think it ties back in beautifully with what Dean was saying is we want to make everyone feel like there's a place at the table and you're heard. Okay, Assad, real progress on diversity and inclusion requires the proactive. So what are some strategies that you've embraced or you'd recommend?
Sure. So I'd say progress needs more than just policies words in a policy statement or on a disclosure page. It really needs to look through the lens of programs that you have in place that reinforce the culture that you have and how you deliver those programs. I'll take a lens because my background is people and culture, human resources, whatever you want to call it, and I'll give you a few examples of what I try to do in the programs that we oversee. So for medium to large size organizations that have year-end programs that award salary increases and merit programs and bonus programs, one of the things that we try to look at is as we go through some of those programs through our HRIS system and our human resource information system is, are there any biases that we see? And a lot of that, and Juan touched on it earlier on, it's self-identification. You have the ability in these systems to self-identify. And what organizations try to use that for is to help understand, are there any biases that creep in the programs that we run? Have we found that the average salary increase for individuals with a disability is less than the median of everyone else? Or higher or lower? Same thing for gender. So we try to run through that. So I encourage everyone, if you work for organizations, that's what we use that data for, and it helps us because then we can challenge those unconscious biases and the discussion, the narrative that we have with the leadership team. That's one lens on the compensation program. Then things such as benefits programs. Even if you think about how an organization manages its benefits programs, if you have a traditional benefits plan, which is a one size fits all, or if you have a flex benefits plan. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but the benefit of having a flexible plan that has, for example, a health spending account is that if you are an individual that has that benefit, if you have dependents that have that are under that benefit, under a health spending account, the Canada CRA has a tax shelter under that provision. So it allows for a lot of allowances. A good example is if you've got celiac disease, gluten intolerance, if you want to buy bread that is more expensive than regular bread, you put that through a health spending account, tax shelter dollars. Bringing it back to our discussion about accessibility and disability, most benefits plans, cover prescription drugs and things like that. But yeah, health spending account is great because if you want to retrofit your driveway to have a ramp, you can do that, and that's tax shelter dollars. Again, being smart about how you bring to life your benefits plans. And also, if you think through the lens of how you deliver those plans, and I'll use Telus Health as a good example. We have something called Telus Health Virtual Pharmacy. Now, there are several benefits of it: lower dispensing fees, cheaper drugs. But if you think through the lens of someone who has a disability, it gets dropped off at your door, right? Within 1 to 3 business days. Think about the independence that gives someone, right? They don't have to have a helper or someone go and pick that up. So again, thinking through the lens of how you deliver those programs as well. So just some strategies from an HR perspective, I would say.
I actually love both of those. And I want to point out that really what you're talking about is measurement in the first point that you made. We measure what we value. So we need a starting point. How do we make that journey and improve on that journey that Dean mentioned? And the second is the flexibility. So thank you for pointing that out. Okay, we're going to start with Dean. Last question before we move on to our keynote speaker. Since we're almost out of time, in 1 or 2 minutes, what is the main message that you would like the audience to take away with them today?
Yeah, I'm going to start with something that Assad said, which is thank you. I think that's number one. That's my first message I want to say. Thank you for being here. I'm going to tell you why. Because if you weren't in this space or if you weren't online, you wouldn't hear, right, some of the challenges that happen in organizations and what you can do to help be a part of solving them. So I want to say thank you, number one. I think the second thing I'll just say real quick is that one of the things we can really do is all of us step up and become allies and advocates, particularly in support of persons with disabilities, whether visible and invisible, whether in our workspaces, society. Let's all strive to really support and be better. And I'll tell you why. Because a lot of us, when we were born, to about 5 years old, we developed these unconscious biases. You saw someone in the playground that might have had a disability, and you said, maybe I shouldn't play with them because they can't play as effectively as this other group can play. The reality is that it doesn't matter who you are. We all deserve to be a part of a space together. And I want to encourage us to all be advocates and allies together for persons with disabilities, invisible or visible.
Thank you.
So some of what Dean touched on, really have an open mind, just around kind of embracing, how to change the narrative of the discussion. And then also think through the lens of unconscious bias, as Dean mentioned earlier, around how to be aware of your own unconscious bias and your organization's unconscious bias, and how do you develop programs, and how do you deliver those programs in a way that's accessible for everyone.
Great.
Thanks. So for me, it's going to be education and self-awareness. Education for people with or without disabilities to understand what needs to be done, or what are job workplace accommodations, or what different type of disabilities required. And self-awareness, me having a disability, I need to understand how I'm going to interact with the world, with people, what I'm able and I'm not able to do. So it's super important for me to be able to understand what I can do and not blame others if something happens. Maybe I didn't get the job, and I want to make sure people don't complain or don't blame, oh, it was because of this person or something like that. Just maybe make sure that you're educated, and if you're not able to go through a specific application online, provide feedback. Again, that's education as well.
Great. Thank you all. And now we're going to take some questions. So for those of you in the audience, if you have a question, we're going to be going to you, but I believe we have a question on Zoom. Mohit, would you like to share that?
The employer during the initial interview upon hired, or do I withhold the information until the need to disclose arises?
Okay, great. So I'll just repeat the question. So I'll summarize it. This is certainly, I work in this space, and probably the thing I train most often on is disclosure. And do I disclose? Do I not disclose? If I'm going to disclose, what do I say? If I'm going to disclose, when should I do it? How do I know that the employer is open to this? So I'll let you guys answer, and then if there's anything that I think is missing, I'll throw in. You want me to just answer? Okay. So there's no prescriptive answer on that. So there's no right or wrong, and it's going to be unique to each individual, and it's going to be unique depending on the job and the company that you're at. It is completely your choice, first of all, to disclose or not disclose, unless it affects the health and safety of others or yourself. So in that case, you do need to disclose. But if barring that, it's completely up to you. There's a ton of different factors, external and internal, that are going to affect that decision. If you have an episodic disability, are you experiencing a phase where things are more difficult for you right now? It can be affected by the job and the opportunities and whether you think the employer is open. Rule of thumb for me as a person with a disability, and I can mask or conceal, those are not meant to be pejorative, they're just actually something that I can do. I tend to disclose upon job offer. And the reason is I want those accommodations in place the day I start. Juan mentioned this earlier. I don't think you want to wait and have somebody go first week, Lisa's not competent versus Lisa needs something change in the work environment to excel. So that's the awareness piece, and why I asked Dean earlier about how do you know? And sometimes for people with disabilities, I think it's very difficult. I didn't realize I needed noise canceling headsets and timeouts until I worked in an open concept environment. And I didn't do that till my 50s. And I walked in and it was like, this is the worst experience of my life. I hate this place. I'm still there 3 years later, and all that was required was a way to deal with the noise. I asked for a private office and got told no, because obviously not everybody's going to get a private office, but noise canceling headsets did the trick. So sometimes it's, figuring out, but I think if you do know, ask for when you need it. If you need an accommodation to excel in the interview, ask for it.
Yeah.
Because you're going to underperform in the interview if you don't have the accommodations you need.
I can say, like, I agree with that. So it really depends on the person. I know from experience, I will disclose at the time that I was writing the cover letter. So if I was called into an interview, I will again disclose I will need X type of accommodations, so they'll know, and it will never be a surprise. I can tell you, early on in my career, I didn't disclose, and once I started the job, that's like, oh, I need some accommodation, and that was always an issue. I learned my lesson as like every single time at the cover letter, but that's personal.
Yeah, and to build off that, to piggyback off that, you do not disclose your disability when you disclose.
Yeah.
You disclose that you have a disability.
You need
Or a
accommodation.
health condition,
Mhm.
or an impairment, whatever words you want. But the employer actually can't do anything, and it's private, medicalized, privileged information. So you just say, I have a disability, and here's the accommodation I need.
Agreed.
Agreed? Assad, do you have anything?
No, I think you said it perfectly.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Oh, we've got another question, Mohit.
Oh, we've got someone in the room.
Yes. Sure.
Thank you so much. Lisa, you actually touched a bit on my question. My question is with regards to diagnosing, getting to a diagnostic, a diagnosed. Dean also touched on how he discovered. Juan has mentioned the repercussions of not identifying what's happening with you and your performance reviews and everything. What's a good path if someone is suspecting that someone might be off compared to others? For example, anything like a hint of I might be experiencing something that's undermining my performance or my way of living life. Would you have any tips on how to reach or get to diagnostic or eliminating possible causes?
Dean, do you want to take
Yeah,
this
so
one?
the question is what if, sorry,
From a personal perspective, I think, how do you know if you're suspecting there's a barrier or a difference, or that you may have a disability, but it's undiagnosed? What's the path forward? The next step.
okay, so sorry, I thought you might have said that if someone, like, if you are suspecting someone else. So if you are suspecting that yourself, if you have one.
Yeah, so, gentlemen, before.
I can tell you, like, growing up, I knew I'm visually impaired, and at school I didn't do I did poorly, and growing up I always created excuse because it was of my visual impairment. However, after I came to Canada, I recognized that I also have like a reading disability. So like me being able to understand what and how is that I have another type of disability and compounded in the one that I have, it affected me when growing up. So if you have, an idea, or if you think that there may be something in there, I think it's always good for you to seek out some advice and try to understand what kind of disability is, because the sooner you are able to identify it, the faster you're going to be able to get the help and the tools you need to perform better.
Yeah, and I think, Assad, get your reflections on what I'm going to say here, but I think that if you have a difficulty, whether you have a diagnosed disability or not, you're having a difficulty. So it's a great opportunity to talk to the employer about what are some different ways to do things. I think the diagnosis is for yourself, and that can lead to improvements, but I think there's people that just do things differently in the workplace, and they just do things differently. But then medical professionals or advice. Assad?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it depends if something, if something you're used to, or the way you're, whether it's how you do certain things, if something you feel is deteriorating or it's not the same. And I know I've had this discussion with Rayhan before on how, his condition progressed. You have a sense of that, you see that. Maybe younger, earlier on, before you get to the workforce, if you feel like there's certain things that you're not able to do in the same way that maybe your friends or peer groups do, that might be an indication where you go to speak to either parents or peer, or support groups. So I think it depends when you find out, whether it's earlier on, if it's something that's kind of instant or it's something that deteriorates.
Yeah, and I think that there's a huge body of literature that shows most people with disabilities acquire them after the age of 45. They're related to aging. I can personally attest to that. For those of you on Zoom, I have very gray hair. So this is a common experience for people. And not everybody is born with their disability, and then it's exploring. The other point that I'll just make is that you do not need to prove you have a disability to the employer. Yeah. Okay, well, I think we're pretty close to moving on. So I'm going to ask our panelists, round of applause. Great responses. Thank you. Okay, Rayhan Azmat is a seasoned finance executive and chartered accountant who at PwC worked with clients like Sony and IMAX. He later channeled his lifelong love of cinema to pursue a deeper career in the movie industry. And he's now vice president, financial planning and analysis at Cineplex Entertainment. Rayhan's life was forever changed in his early 20s. He was diagnosed with a rare muscle condition that causes inflammation, weakness, and atrophy in the arms, legs, and extremities. It's an illness that only impacts 2 people per million worldwide. Over time, Rayhan's condition has progressively worsened, slowly impacting his physical abilities and confining him to a wheelchair in his early 40s. Despite the challenges he's faced, Rayhan continues to thrive in all facets of his life. He has traveled the world with his wife and 2 children, pursued his passion for film, attended some of Toronto's most memorable live events, and is dedicated to advocating for disability rights and inclusion, serving on the board of directors for both Dean Support Services and the Disability Screen Office of Canada. Welcome, Rayhan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We all have a story. And in that story, there's struggle. It could be physical, mental. People struggle with addiction, social anxiety, loss of a loved one, general health, but we've all got struggle in our story. Now, imagine for a moment that every time you left your home, people could see your struggle. Whether it was a stranger on the street or a colleague at work, you couldn't hide it. What assumptions would they make? What judgments might they have? And most importantly, how exposed would you feel? Those are the questions that I found myself asking as I lay there on the operating table at the age of 23 as doctors performed a muscle biopsy on my leg. You see, up until that point, I had a pretty typical childhood in Winnipeg. I was playing basketball and football and baseball and hanging out with my friends. But in the last 2 years of university, there was this limp that started to develop when I would walk for prolonged distances. And the doctors couldn't seem to figure out why. But there's one thing that I knew. And the one thing that I knew was that I was never going to let my employer find out about this challenge. I was a fresh grad, 23 years old. I'm not going to let anybody make assumptions about what I can or cannot do. I'm not going to let them make any judgments on me as a professional and aspiring chartered accountant. So when they asked me to do an inventory count, I said, sure. Now that involved that day me walking for 7 hours through this Amazon-style warehouse on this concrete floor, and I took so many painkillers that day, so many painkillers, just to mask the pain. But the one thing that I could not mask was the limp by the end of the day. So the client looks at me and says, "Hey, Rayhan, you doing okay? You're walking a little with a limp here." And I made up a story. I said, "Oh no, I just fell down the stairs. I re-aggravated it. It's nothing." Of course, I didn't fall down the stairs, but when I sat down in the car in the parking lot at the end of that day, I felt like I fell down flights of stairs. The pain in my leg was so extreme. I can't remember feeling anything like that up until that point in my life. In fact, I sat there for 90 minutes watching my leg tremor until I built up enough confidence to say I can get home safe. All right, my foot can go from the gas to the brake to the gas. And when I got home, I actually needed help for somebody to pull me out of the car. So the next morning when I woke up, and you know that feeling like when you work out the next day, you feel this heaviness, this tiredness about you? Well, it was like that times 100. But there's no such thing as remote work in 2003. No way I was going to call in sick. I'm going to let my employer, let PwC, one of the top global accounting firms in the world, say this 23-year-old guy can't come into work because he did an inventory count. So I sucked it up and I went in. But there's something a little different that I did that day is I wanted to make sure I minimized my walking so that nobody could actually notice that limp. So when the colleagues went for lunch, I said, no, I'm just going to sit at my desk and I'll just eat lunch at my desk. When I needed something printed off the piece of paper, I'd wait till I'd see somebody coming down the hallway, be like, "Hey, Chad, you want to pick up that page of printer off me?" Chad was a nice guy, and he'd get that page. I actually controlled my liquid intake that day just to avoid going to the washroom too much. And I waited till the coast was clear until I finally did. So I limped my way to the washroom. And as I opened the door, who do I see? Washing their hands is Andrew Stebard, one of the leading managers at PwC. He looks right at me and he looks at my leg and he says, "Rayhan, you doing okay?" So yeah, Andrew, I just fell down the stairs. I did an inventory count. I'm going to be fine. He says, "Okay. I'm here if you need anything. You let me know." And he went on his way. So when I got back to my desk, I go to check my resource schedule. I open up my laptop and I go to take a look to see what I got planned for the next week. And I see a big red block for next Monday that says inventory count. I'm done. The fear and anxiety that actually I felt was like nothing else before. There is a It was a write-off of an afternoon. I couldn't even concentrate. The only thing that I could even imagine I could see in my mind was this big red block. But I wasn't going to let anybody know about what was going on. I didn't even know what was going on. I was going to suck it up and I was going to do it. But by some twist of fate, by some stroke of luck, Andrew Stabard walks by my desk at the end of the day. And he says, "Hey, Rayhan, I got a job I need some help on next week. I know you're scheduled on some other things, but you think you could help me out? It's up to you." My chest, there's like fireworks going off from happiness, right? I'm like, "Oh, yes, no, of course, Andrew. I'd be happy to help you out, of course." He has no idea what kind of bullet I felt like I dodged. So I go to that job. It's an awesome week. I mean, the client was happy with me, gave great feedback. I closed all my files with minimal review notes. I felt good. I felt proud. Thursday rolls around and I open up my laptop to see my resource schedule. And what do I see? A big red block that says inventory count. I'm done. You know, you dodge a bullet once, you're not going to dodge a bullet twice. It's just not going to happen. So I remember looking at that, and the pain that I felt 2 weeks before came like rushing back to my body. I hadn't even taken a step yet. I could feel that pain in my body. But I was going to do it. I was going to do it. I was determined to do it. But by some stroke of luck, by some twist of fate, who comes by my desk but Andrew Stabard? And he says, "Rayhan, great work. Really great work this week. You know, I got a job next week I could use your help on. If you, yeah, I see you have inventory counts and a few other things planned for next week, but if you don't mind, if you don't have a preference in me, would you like to come on my job?" Fireworks in my chest. I said, "Oh, yes, Andrew, of course. I would love to come on your job." And then he leans in quietly where nobody else around can hear us. And he says, "Rayhan, if I notice an inventory count on your schedule, would you prefer just to work on my jobs if I pulled you on?" And that's when I realized he knew what he was doing. He saw me limping that week and probably for weeks before that. But he didn't impose what he thought was best for me. He asked. He didn't make an assumption about what I can do or what I can't do. He didn't make a judgment on my behalf. He asked. And most importantly, he saw beyond my struggle. He saw me for my value and potential first and provided me with an opportunity to thrive. Andrew Stabard became the first person that I spoke to about whatever was going on in the entire office. He quickly became my mentor and actually remains my mentor to this day. And I'll never forget a conversation that I had with him when actually I was being promoted to manager. And he said, "You know, Rayhan, I actually didn't do too much for you. You did all the hard work. You provided all the value. You delivered all the results. All you needed from me was to know that if you needed me, I'd be there." And I smiled and I looked straight at Andrew and I said, "But Andrew, don't you understand? For me, that's everything." How would you want to be treated if you were living someone else's story? So those muscle biopsy results come in, inconclusive. 6 months more of testing and testing and testing until I finally find myself in the doctor's office and he says, son, I got to tell you something. And I'm like, don't call me son. You know, no good news is going to come when the doctor calls you son. Son, I got to tell you something. Yeah, I'll give you the good news first. Listen, you're always going to see, you're always going to talk, you're always going to have your mind, you're going to be able to have children, your organs are unaffected, but you have a extremely rare degenerative muscle condition that is going to put you in a wheelchair by your mid-30s. You will be physically impaired, and it's going to happen fast. So by the time I'm 29 years old, the doctor is right. Hiding the limp is the least of my worries. Now I'm walking with a walking stick. And at 29 years old, I'm driving to a job interview at Cineplex Entertainment. It's a dream job. And my brother's driving me in. He says, how are you feeling? I tell him, this is it. I've loved movies my entire life. This is the place that I've always wanted to work at. I can't believe I have this opportunity. Do you have any idea how excited I am? And he smiled. I said, but bro, I'm really nervous because I don't know how they're going to react to a 29-year-old with a walking stick. He said, you're going to do great. You've worked hard. You've earned this opportunity. You're going to do awesome. So he drops me off at the front doors and I get out of the car and the first thing I see is 3 stairs. I look back at my brother and he's got this panic in his eye. And I'm like, no, don't worry. I got this. I put my left hand on the arm rail and I pull myself up those 3 steps and I'm proud. I look back, I give him a wink, a thumbs up, and in I go through those big glass doors at Cineplex Entertainment head office. And I walk in chest out, ready to impress. And what do I see but 30 stairs? 30 stairs between me and reception. I look to my left and there's no elevator. I look to my right and there's no elevator. There's just 30 stairs between me and the opportunity to have my dream job. So what do? I call my brother and I say, you got to get in here quick. He knows what that means. I get my left hand on the arm rail. I look at my watch. I've got 11 minutes. And he pushes from behind as I'm pulling myself up. Right foot up, thud. Left foot up, thud. Right, left, 9 minutes pass, but I'm at the top of those stairs. I'm at the top of those stairs and I feel like I've climbed a mountain. Yeah, I'm sweating through my shirt and sweating through my suit. Yeah, I mean, I'm completely out of breath, but I'm there. He pats me on the back. He says, good luck, and he walks out. So I take a step towards reception and the receptionist turns her head and looks at my walking stick, goes, "Aw, sweetie." But don't say, "Aw, sweetie," looking at me like that because you're not going to want to hear what comes next. She goes, "Aw, sweetie, there's an accessible entrance at the side of the building." Good to know, Yolanda. Good to know for next time. And I go to the waiting room. And in the waiting room, there's movie theater seats. How appropriate for Cineplex Entertainment. So I go and take a seat. 2 minutes left and I'm ready to impress. I'm just trying to get myself down to the proper heart rate. And Susan Campbell walks out, the VP Finance. All right, Rayhan, now's your time. Stand up, shake her hand, and impress. And as I go to stand up out of my chair, nothing. No movement. Evidently, the climb up the stairs has taken so much energy out of my leg, I can't even get up out of the chair. All right, that's okay. I want this. I got this. And I go to lean up and I push so hard, my walking stick falls on the ground, making a loud clanking noise that reverberates through the entire hall. But I got this and I push, nothing. And now my mind is going a million miles a minute because what is she going to think of me? What assumption is she going to make about me as a professional? What judgment is she going to make about somebody who can't even stand up to shake her hand? This is my first impression. Come on, Rayhan, you got to do this. You want this. And I lean forward for that one and final push, and what do I see? Susan Campbell kneels down, picks up that stick, puts out her arm and says, if you need my arm, it's there. If you need my arm, it's there. And those words became so representative of my years to come at Cineplex that I still feel to this day. Sure, they put in push buttons to open up the doors and grab bars in the washrooms, but they went to the extent of building a dedicated elevator that gave me direct access into my office. But there's a conversation that I'll never forget. And it was with Susan Campbell right before she retired a few years ago. And she said, and it was remarkably similar to that conversation I had with Andrew Stabard all those years before. She said, Rayhan, I didn't have to do much. You put in the hard work. You added value. All you ever needed from me was to know that if you needed me, I'd be there. And with a big smile on my face, I said, Susan, me, that's everything. On day one, Susan Campbell could have made an assumption about what I can and cannot do. On day one, Susan Campbell could have made a judgment to go hire anybody else. Andrew Stabard did not need to stop and pay me any attention, but they did. So what can we do? Think about your teams, organizations, and the system. And ask yourself, are we truly building and influencing an environment that tells people that they are more than their struggle? Are we valuing the potential in these people? And are we creating the opportunities for them to thrive? Do you have any idea how different I have felt in a room, not just because of my wheelchair, but for so many other reasons? I could have given up. Do you have any idea how exposed I have felt when I've left my home and I've been seeing strangers on the street and colleagues at work? I could have given up. Why not? But there's one thing that got me through it every single time, is that I knew I was surrounded by people who saw beyond the struggle. All of us have struggle in our story. All of us at some point in our life have a big red block. But when you're put in that situation, don't overcomplicate it. Ask yourself this one simple thing. How would you want to be treated if you were living someone else's story? Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Hi, Lisa. Great, Lisa. Thank you.
I've already been tweeting about the excellent presentation that we had here. Thank you, Rayhan. That was amazing. At this point in the evening, on behalf of WINS, I'd like to take a moment to thank the panelists, our keynote speaker, and everyone who's listening today for joining us this evening, both online and in person. I think Dean said it better than I could with his comments about, remembering the thank you as a takeaway. WINS would also like to take a moment to acknowledge Pride Month and their partner organization, Pride at Work. Through dialogue, education, and leadership, Pride at Work Canada empowers Canadian employers to build workplaces that celebrate all employees, regardless of gender expression, gender identity, and sexual orientation. I encourage everyone to visit their website at prideatwork.ca to learn more about how to create safer, more inclusive workplaces that recognize the skills of 2S LGBTQIA+ people. Additionally, WINS would like to thank its fantastic sponsors for supporting tonight's programming, as well as the ongoing goals that WINS sets out to achieve. The generosity and support of the sponsors helped make tonight happen. I'd like to extend the sincerest appreciation to the following WIN partners. Canada Life, who provides insurance, wealth management, and healthcare benefit products and services across Canada and beyond. Hub, who helps your company develop a benefits strategy that supports your employees and evolves to meet their challenging needs. Weichert Workforce Mobility, who makes work happen by helping companies unleash their mobile talent anywhere in the world. Fiix by Rockwell Automation, who provide everything you need to manage thousands of work orders, assets, and parts in a few clicks. Kinaxis, who delivers unparalleled supply chain agility and resiliency to supply chains across the globe. And finally, TMX, who operates global markets and builds digital communities and analytic solutions that facilitate the funding, growth, and success of businesses, traders, and investors. Speakers and discussions and participants such as yourself on topics such as tonight's are vital to ensuring positive change continues to occur. So again, thank you for your participation. This now concludes tonight's presentation. For those of you here in person at Toronto City Hall, we welcome you to stay and enjoy some networking time. This is a great opportunity to get to know each other, other participants, speak with the panelists in the keynote, exchange contact information, as well as connect with the WINS team. Once again, thank you to all those participating via live stream broadcast over Zoom. And to those here in person, please enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
You can find WINS on LinkedIn or learn more about us at winscanada.com.